So, yeah, this is Bonnie and Andrew, Venezia. We're going to have a nice conversation here about we-space practice. And I just wanted to congratulate Andrew because he's a new husband and a new father
Well,
and congratulations on your thesis. So I was thinking
thank you.
about that down at the barn as a trifecta.
Yeah,
And I really want to thank you for doing this conversation with me because, I wanted you to be at the symposium. I thought that that was a very important piece or space to be held there. And I know that that wasn't really working for you, but I'm sure that we can meet up in real embodied space soon,
yeah.
hopefully.
I'm, this is a this is a long game.
Yeah, it's a
This
very
is a,
long, very
yeah,
long game.
yeah,
We get to play for a long time.
absolutely.
We had spoken a little earlier just before we started, and I was hoping that we could um, create for anyone that is watching the recording some kind of taste or quality of the intimacy or the kind of engagement that constitutes some of this work, constitutes WeSpace. Um, it may or may not be perfectly translatable over the internet and certainly in recording, but um, we we talked about working, beginning that way and just kind of orienting ourselves less toward just a conversation in a
Yeah,
regular interview. And so for me, there's a certain process that happens when I orient myself that way. And I thought maybe we could start by sharing what that process feels like or how do you interpret that process.
yeah. I'd love to. Um, so as I start to really feel into engaging with you, one of the first things that happens is that I like my body and my all of the little bits and pieces that make up my experience of my body really relax and start to um, let go. And I feel like all of the things that come in between you and I are just not present. And I'm open and available to you. And it's a very um, it's beautiful and it's humbling and it's like honorful. Like I'm honored to come into contact with you. And even though I'm sitting in Belgium, and I'm looking at you through a computer screen, I'm very much, um, we're very much here together. And there's something that's so nourishing and breathtaking about that, and that never. Um, I mean, I knew that we were going to do this call for a while, and yet it's surprising to me. Every time it's surprising to me, and every time, even if I'm doing it with the same person, there's a new feeling about it. So I'm very aware right now just of that delight and that joy and the expanse of it, and the presence of it. Just the very clear and simple being here with you. That's really a gift. Just obvious. That's what's going on my side.
Yeah, that's really nice. Um, so for me, there the the presence itself can be overwhelming because, like you're saying, it's always a surprise and it always
Yeah,
comes with so much.
yeah,
There's so much fullness, and um, so that's always for me the first process, and I need to work in some sense. Uphill is a funny word because I just want to be with thatness
yeah,
and integrating that with a conversation. We're going to become intellectual is is fun because it's a challenge, right? So we sit in that space, that fullness, and you don't want to lose it. But for me, it's about trust, right? So for me, way down there, and this is what I noticed when we first met, and we don't really know each other very well, but there's this automatic trust, and that then somehow is the fullness of being with you in the presence. So I keep going like that because it actually feels like something, you
Yeah.
know? And um, and then for me also, I um, that's like a deeper level, and then the next level for me is to make sure that there aren't contractions. So this would be more like a subtle level, and look where the energy is and when the energy isn't. And that's not so much happening here because on one the intimacy is easier.
Yeah.
Um, and then try to let all of that become
Yeah. Yeah.
discourse,
Totally. Totally.
which is
For me,
hard.
it's um like for me that the effort in it is like making sure, you know, it's a weird way to say it. Making sure is a weird way to say it, but it's like relaxing into allowing that fullness to express itself without without the contraction sort of getting in the way. So the sense that I have is also, there's this really this very ejaculatory experience of creativity that's popping and popping and
Yeah.
popping moment to moment, and yet the that creativity is coming out of my my effort. Now I don't think this is the same for everybody, but it very very fine moment to moment with what I feel like I'm doing right now. My effort is actually being expanded in a significant way on like holding everything else off, like making sure that everything else is cool, like a cat herder or something, like and then it just happens, and that's a very, I don't know, that's yeah, it just makes me very happy, like, but it is that movement is such a, there is this
Yeah.
sort of, yeah.
Yeah, it was funny because doing these conversations with Zach Schlosser, and he just said we space work is fun because it's so much fun, and so of course it's not always fun, but
No, it's not.
but when it's fun, it's real fun, and I think there's a synergy. One of the things we discovered about ourselves is that there's a synergy in the sense that we open up pretty easy. There's for me not a lot of contraction that I feel, and the technology for me is a little more of a contraction. Um, and then um, and then our intellectual play is a very nice field, and that also can be rare. So we'll get into that, but I can feel my mind saying, I want to play now.
Yeah, yeah.
I want to play now. And um, I think when it's been my experience that people who aren't so excited about ideas can see an interaction that we might have as merely intellectual. And it certainly does not feel that way. Um, so, and that's something special, I think, that this particular dyad has.
Yeah, like um a lot of my energy tends to be expressed, especially in terms of excitement in an intellectual way, and yet, and this is maybe not as apparent, I think, over like a video, right? But if you were here with me present, you would actually see that it's not. There's a it's like a pyramid. It's my body is totally in it. It's totally here. My
Yeah.
heart is totally in it. It's totally here. I'm present emotionally right now in such a this open, joyful sense, and then it comes out of the
Yeah.
ideas, and I think for me, um, you know, obviously, so here you and I, this is a very interesting space that we're bringing about now, because it is, fundamentally it has to be between you and I at this moment, and yet we're also sort of aware that we're also talking for an audience, and that makes it very different, I think. And so in other what has taken me time to learn, I think, is that if I'm in a we space with someone else who doesn't resonate in the same way intellectually that I do, then that's okay. That's totally cool. And my presence with them as I'm feeling into what they're doing and being moment to
Hmm.
moment will show up appropriately. And it doesn't mean that my intellect is on the side or anything, but the play aspect of it is maybe more viscerally felt in my body, or just be in the back and forth that happens in relationship and being with
Yeah.
somebody of that is an ineffable joy in itself. And it just because you and I happen to love ideas, I think it gets expressed in that way. But it's here in everything else too. It's here in my hands, it's here in your smile. And yeah.
Oh no, the ideas. One of the experiences I've had, which is a recent nice experience, a surprise, this kind of work comes up with a lot of surprises, is that when you have the trust and you have this other thing you were talking about, the joy and the enthusiasm, that people can participate in the discussion, the signifiers, the actual shared conversation in multiple ways. And so, for example, we've had these experiences on the Magellan courses and with that group where people are invited to just listen to the play, and then the words bring out poetry or riffs in them. And uh, um, a a real intellectual would get annoyed because they'd be like, we're working here, or we're
Right.
making just important
It's
distinctions.
just curious.
Yes, right. But if you can allow this other community presence to arise, it not only gives relief, but it creates insight, right?
Yeah.
So there's something about the other aspects of the joy that creates more possibility for insight that can come out either as poetry or a shift in a view if you're an intellectual. So, um, yeah, so it's like, I guess it's also, I mean, I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but it's like having children around. So you might be working on your thesis and looking over and watching children, and they're saying something, and it's directly incites your work because it's a relief. It's it's part of the whole without being eaten up by your
Yeah.
focus
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Like one of the things I think that's wonderful about this, but also very challenging for people, is that everything is included. And um, if there, there's a space for everything, which doesn't mean that it's not a practice of discernment. It's a very strong practice of discernment, both intrapersonally, in my own self. Where is this coming from? Is this coming from a place where, do I want you to see me in a certain way? Do I want you to see me as a smart person right now? And if I do, then I'm going to be doing things that I think you will think, blah, blah, blah,
Right,
blah, blah,
right.
blah, blah. If I just let it go, like, yeah, it doesn't really matter, right? That's an intrapersonal discernment. But interpersonal discernment too. And yet it's such a practice of opening to that fullness and to be able to be affected by everything here. Like I'm I'm sitting underneath my skylight, and the the world is turning outside. There's a clear clouds and clear blue sky, and that just affected me in a way that has affected our conversation now in a positive way, in a very beautiful way. That yeah, I think the difference between, again, and a lot of what my thesis about is this shift from making meaning as an individual, um, in a way that, where you're cutting the world up into pieces, right, to categorize it, and versus making meaning in a way that uh, sees that those pieces are not really fundamentally, or the act of cutting is not something that creates the pieces as being fundamentally different from each other. I think I just did a terrible job of explaining that, but and that, when you I totally just froze. I had a brain freeze. I think you know what I mean, though. I mean, I know what I
Well,
mean. So
what came up for me, no, I think I don't know what you mean yet. So I want to go there because that's like where the energy is for you and me. So I think that what I heard, what came up in my mind was discernment is not the same as judgment, right?
mhm.
And and judgment is sometimes, I think, too strong of a term because there's also very, very, very subtle forms of judgment, right? So you could be making discernment, and it's like that joke, right? What is that joke? The Dalai Lama says, just go one day without having any bad thoughts about someone. And the guy goes, oh man, that's easy to do,
Yeah,
right? And there's a subtle, there's a, so, um, and I find when you watch the mind making discernments, it's very, very tricky, right? It's very tricky. And for me, watching, and it's very tricky, and yet it seems to come in just a handful of common patterns, So that gives us hope to be able to look at them.
yeah,
And so one common pattern is um, to make a discernment that has a subtle or not so subtle boundary that makes an I and it, or an I,
yeah,
me, and a you, or
yeah,
I don't want to say I thou because that term is about that boundary's not there. One, if th- there's always so much going on that making those kinds of discernments and watching that itself is very interesting. So that's what I heard you say, something like that, like the cut. When you said the cut is not necessarily a bad thing or something.
right. Well, yeah. I mean, it's interesting to use the word bad there, because I think that's also one of the sort of unacknowledged. When you're making a judgment, you're saying this one thing here is good and this one thing here is bad, and the practice is, I think, or a large part of the practice is accepting everything as it arises, which, if in your own practice is hard enough to do. I mean, if you're sitting on a meditation cushion, it's really hard to let every single thing that arises be totally okay.
Yeah.
But when you're sitting with another person and you're trying to do something together, letting every single thing that arises be okay is infinitely more difficult.
Right.
And it's infinitely more difficult for every single person that you add into that group. That's why, you said it's a little easier because you and I are a dyad here, and that's very true. Like, the dynamics that are happening between the two of us are complex, but they're infinitely less complex. And if there were a third person here and we were trying to genuinely have a generative conversation with three people, that's much tougher.
Yeah.
And it has to do with, that judgment comes along with a very subtle but fundamental rejection of something. It's saying, I don't want this right now. And the move is rather to say, okay, here's everything, here it is, right? And then to make a discernment is to say, not that I don't want this right now, but that this might not have been, this might not have been the most skillful thing to do or the most skillful thing to say, or even to say, this is the direction that I think that I want to go in or that I think we should go into, to be able to do that without in some way making a subtle judgment of somebody's being, which is, I think at a very low, at a very, basic level is what we're doing. When I say, don't do that, I'm really saying, in this moment, you're wrong,
Yeah.
right? In this moment, you've done something which is impossible. Like
Yeah.
it's for all these beautiful, beautiful, um, like seaweed, waving in the ocean. The seaweed doesn't wave in the wrong way, and it just happens to be that we're seaweed that thinks that the way that
That's
seaweed
so
waves is.
nice.
And in a certain way, of course, that's true. Like it's certainly not a practice of everything being okay regardless. Like I'm not gonna practice non-discernment with somebody who walks up to me in an alley with a knife, right?
Right.
That's a very different circumstance. But in terms of we space, and that's also why it's important to have that interpersonal discernment, because it's much more difficult to
Hmm.
practice this with people who are not at least in some way able to make the have the observation and make the insight that how I'm showing up right now at this moment is in some way conditioned by something that I don't want to be true. Um,
Yeah. And I think that um I love that. There's no way for a seaweed to wave the wrong way. Um so we get a bunch of people together and the relational dynamics get magnified exponentially. It's nonlinear. Like three is
yeah,
not a third more than two. It's like a lot more than two, and then on, right?
yeah,
And we're not even counting the background noise. I mean, most of this is done in an experimental setup, but if it's done in the supermarket or, in the middle of New York City, there's all that too. And then, so now then you used a word that we'll move. I could carry forward. And the thing is, like I look at it in terms of like the, so we talk about the subtractive thing. You want to subtract the judgment. You want to subtract the conditional responses, subtract the triggers,
well,
subtract.
well wait,
Go ahead.
it's hmm. uh, this is it's very tricky to talk about, I think, because yes, in a certain sense, yes, that's true, and then in another sense, if a judgment comes up, that's also just what's happened. That's another movement,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And so that in itself is okay, but you surface that, you make it transparent, you recognize that that has happened, and you say, oh, you know what's happening right now? I'm judging you for just having said that, but that's interesting. That
yes,
becomes not another thing to make a judgment on, but that becomes a point of inquiry. It becomes a point of possible exploration. It may not be the right one at the
yeah,
moment, but it becomes a point of possible exploration at the moment. So it's different than saying we don't want judgment.
yeah.
Judgment is bad because that's just doing the same thing again. That's not the that's a very mental move that is
Exactly, and it creates shadow, and
yeah,
so that's what you just described is what I mean by subtraction. It's you're subtracting a certain pattern around what rises. So it
yeah,
could be and that's exactly the move you make. Something comes up, it's judgment. You don't replace the judgment, you replace the judging person with the curious little person. Now, so
yeah,
now I'm curious. Wow, look, there's judgment in there. That is cool. So that's a little metaphor that I use. So, um, um, but then there's the additive, like you said something about now we have all these relational dynamics, and I want to get back to that because in another way I think the relational dynamics themselves, there's like a genius into the fact that they get very, they magnify really quickly. I mean, I think at a certain level of this work, when you come out the other side, my hypothesis is that we find that what looks to us now as obstacles is actually energy. You know, that relational dynamics magnify is a great potential. That
Absolutely,
they
yes.
magnify and then get entrained in these patterns that the energy can't fit in.
Yeah,
That is, I think, where we're at now. So
I'm totally
that
with you.
they magnify is really cool. And it's the same with, but I won't go into that. So now we're going to add, because we're greedy, we're going to add, not only do we want to be able to surf the relational dynamics, but for me, the word collective insight, and maybe then we can talk about your thesis, because it was the first time I've seen someone say some of these things like this, and I have to admit I feel that it's a greedy position. So now we're not only going to be able to surf these complex relational dynamics, but we're going to say we want to put this in service to something, right?
Mm.
So I call it insight. So we might all want to have an insight about something, or you know, create a new imaginary. It doesn't have to solve a problem. And for me, at this level, solving problems, they really, when you get on the other side, they dissolve. They don't really solve.
Yeah,
So so
solve,
maybe
yeah.
you could talk about that and whether or not you were interested in that in your thesis or not.
Oh man. One of the things that's so difficult about this, I think, and we've come up against it a bunch of times, but you know, from the in this sort of mind of fullness, right, where everything is connecting with everything else, right? It's very difficult to pick which thread it is that you want to start talking on because we're still talking in a linear way, right? You could have a transcript of this call. Our experience of it isn't linear, right?
Right.
The reality behind it or the phenomena behind it is not linear, but that in itself can be linear. So let me just say that because there's a lot in that question. I think I think the question of motivation is really central, and it's central not just because we want to put something in service of it, but because our motivations have so much to do with what our identities are and what we think is real, right? And so this is what when I use the term subtle, a lot of what I'm talking about is these personality-based motivations and interpretations of what is reality, right? And um, so it's not that we want to put it in service of something. It's that by picking a motivation, um, we're like, oh, there's like a whetstone. We're rubbing ourselves against this. We all get together and we agree, yeah, this is what we want to do. And then as we do that, we find out, oh, well, we have these other motivations, and they can be beautiful motivations, and they can be base motivations, and they're going to be both, right? I'm going to come to this circle, and I'm going to have some needs, some really fundamental psychological needs that are unmet because I'm a human being, and I'm going to come to the circle and I'm going to say, no, I want to do this exalted thing, but actually what I really want to do is I want somebody to tell me that, I'm okay, right? Or like I'm funny or I'm lovable or whatever it is, right? And so that's one thing. And then so as we are looking at these motivations and as we start to dissolve, I have that same exact sense of the solution, the dissolution are really more synonyms than they are antonyms. And um, as we begin to dissolve the motivations that we have that are unconscious, then this other motivation starts to arise, right? And we can state it, we can say what it is, right? We can look at it, we can sort of move towards it, but it's going to continually arise, and if it doesn't continue, it's going to continually arise spontaneously, or some other motivation is going to continually arise spontaneously, and then that becomes the thread, right? That
Right.
becomes the thing that we're going. It might actually, whoop, hold on, my computer's running out of batteries.
Nope.
There we go. So, I mean, that might be um, you know, that might be an interesting place for us to pivot here. Like, what are what are the motivations that we're bringing to this call right now? Like, why are we doing this here? Because
Hmm.
I think that inquiry is always going to be a it's going to be a fruitful one. It's going to be it's going to be a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
It's going to bring the conversation to a different place.
Yeah, I think just we can answer that question, but just that last little thing you said, that's something that I've been noticing is that these other things, like you get you get involved in this motivation, and then really what I want to talk about is, why do I feel unvalidated?
Yeah.
I don't think those are distractions. I think there's a genius to the pattern, right?
Yeah.
The kelp is waving a certain way.
Yeah.
And in that moment, that's the direction, if we're going to speak in linear terms, right?
Yeah.
So that is the nonlinearity of it, but it is the way. It's like doing one of those video games where if you think linearly, you're not going to take a right. And the
Yeah.
stuff, so
Yeah.
you start to get a sense, a different intuitive sense of this, this, I hate to call it a pattern, because a pattern sounds like something that just keeps going over and over. But the genius, there's like a genius in the dynamics themselves.
Yeah.
And once you get a taste for that, then you get more and more trust.
Yeah.
And the more trust, the more choice you make in that direction, and then it starts to, you know, build on itself. But
Yeah.
the motivation for this call, I mean, the motivation for this whole interest in mine is that I feel that I don't feel that I know much about this work. I haven't, um, and I really want to, um, I want to learn more. I'm very curious about it in what other people have done, what is possible, what is not possible. I tend to be able to sit with chaos, so I like it even when there's a lot of chaos. It's very interesting too. So um, yeah, I just curious. I just like, yeah. How about you?
Um, yeah. So I guess, on a surface level, there's, so I wrote this thesis, and I'm interested in, um, furthering. I'm interested in furthering this, and that's, for me, I also feel like I'm not, I'm a researcher. I'm an investigator in this mode, at least. I don't consider myself to be that in a lot of places, but um, and and that curiosity is also, you know, there's a dual motion there. Curiosity is not just like there's this thing that I'm curious about, but it's like there's a I'm curious about an intuition, and as I follow that intuition, I get more curious about that intuition, and it continues to pull me along. And so I think, I am. I wish I could be there. That's another thing, actually. Like, I really wish that I could be there at your place in November. That would be. It actually turns out I'll be able to be in the United States. I just got my residency card for Belgium, but my brother's wedding is actually that same weekend, so I'm not. I'm still not going to be able to be there. But um,
Just bring the wedding into the circle.
right, I know that would be.
That'd be awesomer.
I don't have enough people to hold that wedding, but um, uh, yeah,
Yeah.
it's life sustaining. It's food, it's nourishment. Like, talking with you is going to be without a doubt, one of the one of the two or three highlights of my week. And in a certain sense, I mean, like one of the highlights of my week is also every time I see my baby or
Yeah,
every time
yeah.
I see my wife. Like that's magical, but a slightly different thing. So I'm motivated right now by you know, like I said, I think this is a long game, and I'm motivated to really begin to explore your relationship with me, and what it is, where the resonance is between the two of us. But I'm also interested in you know in what the other thing that is happening right now, because there are going to be other people who are watching this, is sort of I'm throwing out I'm throwing out my tendrils or my tentacles, and people are going to watch this, and that forms a connection. And then that connection can be strengthened. That connection can inform actually what it is that I'm doing. That's very
Yeah.
important. Like not everything, I'm sure, because I know myself, I'm sure that I've said two or three things so far that I will probably regret later, because it's going to cost a lot of explanation. It's not actually exactly what I meant, right? Or um, uh, I think I think you can't but be curious about this work. I mean, I think there are people who are really skilled at it, and we're still at like step one of this gigantic,
Yeah.
path that we don't even, we may find we're going to find ourselves back here again a million different times. Like the path isn't even a straight path. It's not a
Yeah.
place going anywhere necessarily, right? We're just very dimly becoming aware of this, and I think the possibilities for that are astounding. And I wouldn't, this, of all the things I have touched upon in my life, like this is the thing that's like, whoa,
Yeah.
there's something happening here that is crazy. That's I guess my motivation probably for being here right now. That's part of it, at least. I don't know if you can ever fully uncover it in that way, but
Well,
um,
there's a sense of it's where the action is. When kids like to hang out in the street and they're walking, and then all of a sudden there's like, you can feel it, right? You can hear, you got to go that way because you can
yeah,
feel it's as intuitive as that, I think,
yeah.
for our community.
And it's obvious too. Like it's just, when you say intuitive, the kids aren't intuiting something happening over there. They're just like,
Right,
oh,
right.
something's happening over
Yeah.
there. We gotta go
That,
over there and
yeah.
look at this, and I need to give myself to this, and on whatever, I mean, what kids aren't saying that verbatim, but you know what I mean. Like, I got to go see what's going on over there, because there's a bunch of
Yeah.
people and they're doing something really cool, and I think that resonated through, the interviews that I did for my thesis. Not one person was missing from, they may have said it differently, but it was basically like, the first time I tapped into this, it totally changed everything for me. The first time that I recognized or saw that this was a possibility, it absolutely and completely changed my life. And that I think that's um, not only true for me, but every time that every layer of the onion that I unpeel, the first time that I even, you know, um, when was it, like 4 or 5 years ago, I was just doing this exercise with a group of people for my master's program. Is the first time we met each other, and uh, and we were in this really profoundly beautiful space with each other, and doing sort of the postmodern new age, like interpersonal stuff, and like, oh, people are crying, and it's like really touching and beautiful. And it was like, oh my God, that's a person. There's a person there sitting next to me, and I've never seen one before, but I've heard of them, and it was this discovery, and that discovery of what is possible when you bring people together, and start to systematically investigate and dissolve the assumptions that you're bringing to the table, is so creative. It's so generative. Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah. That's interesting. That whole I I I think this work is going to answer or insight a lot of create a lot of insight. That's an insight right there. That is a person. And then now we can completely deconstruct that experience, but um which I've been known to do. But that, like from a certain perspective, like my perspective is I walk around, and from a certain perspective you see that everyone, like the way we're feeling here, everything is always falling in relationship with everything else, right? This to me is kind of obvious. It could be overwhelming, and then we walk around and everyone's looking for community. And so this work, I think, has a lot to insight about that. And so when you say, all of a sudden I realize there's a person there,
Yeah.
and at some point someone will write a book about why there was a person and then there wasn't a person and then why there is a person, right? Um, so that's a curious question. Why is it that at our state, that people can have those experiences? Why is it that it's not so that it comes as being like rare that you had that experience, but the real question is,
Yeah.
why
Why?
is it
Why
exactly?
is it rare? Yeah.
Why was the before that,
Sure. Yeah.
that
That,
becomes,
oh, that's a great question too. What was the before? Is you sort of you lose the sense of, you just know something's happened. You know something's different, and that was a good thing. But you're not
yeah,
sure how you could possibly have seen someone else. And in the past, how did I look at people and not see them as people? I don't. That question's actually, I don't think, so hard, because I still look at people as not people. I still cognize people in my life, day to day, in ways that are not, second person. I do this with the people who are closest to me, and as I live, I'm constantly unearthing those ways of, oh, I'm actually relating in a very instrumental way to this person in front of me right now. I'm trying to get something out of this object in my life at this moment, and it's either giving it to me or it's not giving it to me.
yeah,
And my reaction to it giving it to me or not is either, is frustrating, or like, yes, I feel like I'm king of, shit mountain, or whatever it is. But yeah, and really, I think some of the things that we're coming to, and that start to become so obvious in these groups, the kinds of, the emptiness of boundaries, the emptiness of these fundamental lines with which we sort of locate where reality is, my sense of being me, and that meanness is a real thing that is independently real. It's not, dependent on everything else around it, what have you. Um, in the sense that, we're radically consciousness, playing and experimenting and learning about itself and discovering itself constantly and over those things. I have the feeling that it's possible for a human society to live with those things as being, basic and foundational, fundamental experiences. I won't say assumptions, but,
right,
ways to actually interact with people, because it is so natural too. I mean, you get there, and it's, you might think something about it, you think something about the practice, you think something that's going to happen, and yet if you're really open to receive what is in front of you moment to moment as it's going on, something else is going to arise, and that thing is going to both be surprising and amazing and totally natural and totally obvious. And that's so I'm with you.
yeah,
I don't understand how it's hard for me to remember that, 99.99% of the people in the planet who might be watching, let's say, out of context, things that you and I are saying, would have absolutely no idea what the hell we're talking about.
yeah,
Not at all. No referent in their experience for what it is to be
yeah,
in a field of consciousness with another person. And yet, when you start to do that with people, or even not with people, I mean, even when you do it, when I'm out walking in the street, and I'm tuning into people that I'm, walking next to or walking with, like, that's natural. That's not, and it's there, and it's just there to be uncovered. It's just sitting there in your experience already in a certain way.
in a certain way.
a certain way.
I've looked at this and I think that yes, when you have the experience, it comes home to you as like so foundational and so natural. But I've had the opposite experience too. I was watching a couple of years ago, I was looking at art and I think it's from Peter Bruegel the Elder. It might not be him, but there's
Yeah.
this painting of him, of a man, a farmer in a field, and his wife and their baby, and they are in relational space and they're praying, and it's, and there's some kind of like light coming down that, and I had this, I realized, or it came to me, this idea that they were not in interpersonal space. They were coming from the earth and going to God. That the spiritual impulse was there before the interpersonal impulse. And then I started to see this everywhere. So for example, this notion, we're going to talk about this with it, like in Qigong, and I just had this conversation the other day that you could go from the personal, have a spiritual realization that tapped in the causal without going through the intersubjective. So
Absolutely, yeah.
I think this is truly emergent. I think that this whole other level of being and being conscious, it feels like a coming home when you come home to it,
Yeah.
but if you look, it doesn't. There
It's
is.
it's both of those. It's both of those at once, and that's
Yeah,
one of the that's so damnably frustrating about talking about it. But it's also there's actually a really, I think, a really fundamental point in that, which is that there's no, there's no fundamental mutually exclusive difference between that something can be discovered and that it was already there implicitly. Those are there are these foundational ways in which we take the world which is in front of us and put it on one side of the room or one
yeah,
side or the other. So that's an activity. That's something that we're doing. And what we're doing in we space is being shown through each other how we do that,
yeah,
and then continually bringing that forth so that we can look at it and realize, oh, this is an activity and I can do something else with it. I can play with this activity. I can do it in a different way, right? I can put it to use here. I can put it to use there, or I can drop it entirely if it's not serving me. I can't drop the mechanism entirely, but this one particular way that I might be making meaning might be really shitty. It might be really bad in my life, and I can actually, it doesn't usually just happen like I can just drop it, but I'm doing it, and so I can stop doing it. It's like when you have a muscle that's tense, and then you realize like, I just have been doing that for 20 years, but I don't have to because it's a skeletal muscle. Like I can just let it go.
yeah,
That's a really basic thing that I think is and it's happening in interpersonal spaces because so much of our boundaries are created interpersonally
yeah,
in a way that is, I think, much more fluid than when you're sitting on your pillow by yourself. And I'm not to denigrate meditation at all.
right,
I meditate, and I've been a ardent meditator for many many years. But when it's hard to, it's much easier to see something that you're doing when somebody can point it out to you. And they don't even have to be conscious about pointing it out to you. They can just be a jerk. And if they're being a jerk, I feel like they're a jerk, right? Or they can be super duper.
yeah,
Either
yeah, yeah.
way,
No, I understand.
why why am I so pissed at this guy? I've never even talked to him, right? He's got this stupid looking face and blah 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 blah. And when I'm really intentional about it, when I'm really earnest, when I'm
Yeah,
earnest at work, then I'm gonna start looking at that. I'm gonna say, oh, that guy is not objectively a jerk. I don't like him because of this other thing that I'm
yeah.
doing over here, and I don't have to do that. And actually, me doing this here is the same thing that I do at work with that other guy, and that's why I got that demotion the other week. And I don't know.
Well, I think this is why people, call it sacred work and spiritual work, because when you receive knowledge that makes you feel like it's always been the case, that they're ultimate causes, then this has always been the taste of sacred work. That, you know, you come home and notice it for the first time. This is the iterative process, right? So when you first discover subtle energy, you feel like you discovered it when you were 12 years old, but you feel like it's always been there, and it's this recursive thing that happens with time. I think always creates is when we use that word. You know,
Yeah.
you have a ontological encounter with God. You may have gone through school and talked about God, but you have, and then even though that happened when you were 22, you know that it's always been forever. And I think that's a good description of why people are calling it sacred or spiritual work, which I would agree. I would agree with that.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, I just wanted to, if it's okay, if I get a little linear right now.
yeah.
um,
And do it.
I wanted to, we could continue, but I wanted to maybe build a little space around your work, specifically in the thesis. I want to
Mhm.
give people an idea of, well, first of all, I hope they read it because
I
I
hope
think I think it's really
yeah,
important. And
thanks.
I loved the way you incorporated all these other voices and the nuances, like that there was a sameness and a multiplicity of voices in those interviews, which I thought was awesome. And
Yeah.
and then your first person accounts were even awesomer.
I love
um,
it. Did you pick that up?
um, so I wanted to see if you had like a little key pieces that you wanted to make um, explicit in terms of your relationship now with your thesis, maybe, um,
Oh, that's interesting. Um, well, I think, there's a couple things um, it's interesting, the idea of have writing a thesis and the idea of like knowledge, this very academic way of knowledge generation, right? Which I kind of sometimes hew to, and then kind of have to leave the foundation or the what is it called reservation. I'm off the reservation sometimes with that. Is just is something that's really interesting, and unfortunately so, because we kind of like we kind of have this idea of competency that can get in the way of either seeing yourself or seeing somebody else. And so I think the first thing I would really want to make explicit is that um, you know I've done a lot of this. I have thought about this for a long time. I have worked in this. I've done a lot of thinking in the different related areas, consciousness, meditation, just relational dynamics as such, philosophical questions of what is real, how do we know what is real, these kinds of things. And yet at the same time, all of that knowledge is has got to be put into practice moment to moment to moment. It doesn't do me any good sitting on a page. And so why I bring this up is because, I wrote that thesis now 4 or 5 months ago, and I wouldn't change anything drastically at this point. I just read it again recently for the first time when I started sending it out to people. I'm proud of it. I stand behind it, and at the same time, that that's a jumping off place that has got to be constantly iterated, constantly iterated, constantly iterated. I've come up with this sort of meta view of how a number of different people who are really experienced in this work think about it. But again, that's going to change as we keep engaging in this way with each other. And I think that's really important. I really, obviously, because I don't think there's anything else that I can even think of that I would be important to explicitly get out of the way at the beginning. It's really important to make that clear. And I think I do that in the thesis as well. And I guess actually something else which came up into my head is um, the difference between, and there are several different very related themes or things I could say, but the difference between like having a destination and having a way to get there, and even to say linguistically a way to get there, there is no there, right?
Hmm.
We are very much in this together, and we have to figure out how, where it is that we want to go. And one of the I'm proud of myself for this. One of the phrases that I love is in the beginning, in the introduction, is like, you know, um, we don't know where we're going, but we don't want to go there. And we're not going to go to we've gotten to the point where we're not going to go somewhere really nice as a human species, and we're all going to go there together unless we can get together all together and figure out where it is that we do actually want to go. What is the potential of our human race, of our global human being at this moment in time? And I think that the way to do that has got something to do with these intersubjective practices in we spaces, and that's really the key. That's the central point of the
Yeah.
whole thing. I may be grossly wrong about 90% of what I'm saying, but that is going to come up. And if we're not able to engage with each other, transparently and vulnerably and intimately, and really and authentically, then we're in a shitstorm. We're already in a shitstorm.
Yeah, yeah.
We're there. We got that part. We did that part already. We're in the hurricane. We don't have to worry about that anymore. We don't have to keep
Yeah.
picking things up. But if we want it to be unmucked, which is a question in itself, if we want it to be unmucked, then we
Right.
got to figure out new ways of talking to each other.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. I probably lost my thought. Like for me, the future scenarios are a great attraction, in terms of like we don't know. I agree with you. We don't know what we're doing. It's all a surprise. That's part of what is actually interesting about the practice, to be in this space of that's not mediated by media, can't be mediated yet. We can't go out and read the performance handbook on it and come up with a lot of projections yet.
Yeah.
um, but part of, for me, the vision is that when it becomes more ordinary, you think about children, a lot of the obstacles is that for our generation, or certainly for my generation, it gets easier. It's easier for you now. Is that there's a bootstrapping thing that we're going through, right? Our language fails us, our structures fail us. But if so, I don't think it's, like you said, it's a long game, right? And the idea is to be able, the vision I have is to be able to take this work out of, continue to do the experiment, but as seamlessly as possible, to take it out of the experimental phase and move it into practice, so that education is being transformed in this country, but something weird is going on, in my opinion. Machines, the reason why they can have MOOCs is because machines take care of all our information and our knowledge right now. And so for me, that's not really an exciting transformation, because we're still teaching the same stuff. We're still
Yeah.
cramming that stuff into kids' heads. But what if we taught capacities instead? What if what education was collective insight in the classroom? And that might mean we go and we tap into this information here, or we go and so for me, then this whole bootstrapping problem gets overturned, because people are born into the practice. It becomes tacit knowledge.
Yeah.
And then I think that's when it actually becomes, well, it isn't instrumentalized, because it is who they are, and becomes part of the rolling transformation of human possibility. So for me, and I don't think that that's necessarily that move itself is that necessarily that far away. I truly don't, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, uh, Stephen Martineau says something that I'm pretty sure that I include in there, which is that, you know, he I think basically has the viewpoint that our lifetimes are, and he's a little younger than you, a little older than me. Our lifetimes are preparatory, basically setting up the stage so that that is happening. So that
Yeah.
you don't have, and I've said this. This is one of my favorite things. I think, like, dynamics that every generation has problems, and they and in working through those problems and dissolving those problems, they generate a set of tools, and then they very proudly and with great fanfare hand those tools off to the next generation. And the next generation gets those tools and looks at them and says, "What the hell are these for? We don't have these problems anymore. We have these problems over here."
Yeah.
So I think what the orientation that he has, what it sounds like the orientation you have too, and it's one that I have, is that we're setting the ground so that a generation can be raised that is aware of and really practicing and participating with these kinds of
Yeah.
dynamics. There's something to be said about that as well, and what the possibilities of that are, because there are certain things that are really developmentally required to be able
Yeah.
to hold space of this magnitude. But I think that's a slightly different and less interesting conversation at the moment. So what Stephen Martineau said, though, is finally is you know, the mathematics, we space changes the mathematics of all of this very much. And I think there's something, you know, a secondary topic, and this was really, um, it's sneaky, and it's not really as secondary as it looks, but a secondary topic is what happens to humanity when a certain percentage of people begin to cleanly disidentify themselves from their, personality-based motivational
Hmm.
patterns. And um, and I have a feeling, and I think a lot of people have this sense, and you can talk about where exactly that happens in your own personal development, yada yada yada. But my sense of it is that things change really quickly because you're now no longer fighting. You're
Right.
essentially you're not pushing off of reality anymore. And when you're not pushing off of reality, when you're able to open to the entirety of it, or at least the entirety of it that is present in your consciousness, right? Then not only is your life different, but your intersection with other people's lives is very different. And all it takes, um, if you've been in any of these spaces that have really, um, kind of taken off, like it's the simplest thing. It just takes basically like the recognition of everybody in the room that they're doing this right now. That yes, we're in this, we got it, we're in this together, we're doing it right now. That's really hard to do in a room of 25 people. It's really hard to do in a
Yeah.
room of 50 people. But as we're getting used to being able to do that, yeah, I think it becomes, it becomes scalable, and in an exponential sense. I mean, in the sort of Moore's law sense, in the Ray Kurzweil sense, where
Yeah.
1% is not 1 out of 100. It's not 1% of the way there. Once you've got 1% of the task done, you're 2 steps away from it, because
Yeah.
you have to go from 1% to 10%, and then you go 10% to 100%, and those are actually 2 steps. That's
Yeah.
not 100 more steps to take. So yeah, I have no idea what that looks like, but that's why I'm doing this too. Like, I want to know what it looks like. I want to see this happen, and I know, and I agree with you too. I think there are a few different things going on. So I kind of higher levels, people who are really coming together in a way that they with that sort of trust that you mentioned at the beginning, where that trust can be, it doesn't have to be built up, but it actually can just be given by recognition. Um, in those spaces, something has happened, which is, we're learning how to more and more quickly at least tune into a field of awareness with each other, a field of interpersonality with each other. And then the other thing that's really important, that I think when you said practical, I think this is what you mean, so correct me if you're wrong, but those people are starting to, not with each other, but with everybody else, you know, come up with the ways in which people can participate with each other in this kind of generative space, even without that sort of, quote unquote spiritual practice, or that developmental ability, whatever it is. And that's also something that I'm really fascinated in. How do we get together and do things, not to put an emphasis on the doing, but doing things from this, like, hey, we're all here together. What is it that we want to do? What is our motivation right now? What
Yeah,
are we together to do here? Why are we in this room together? Why are we in this class together? Why are we in this family together? Why are we friends with each other? What is it that we're doing here?
right. Yeah, to have it inform the ordinary, to become ordinary, and I don't mean that in a negative way. So, yeah, so there's a tendency for these kinds of things sometimes to become insular, and um, just in terms of the individual practice, individual spiritual practice has had to go through those phases of being very insular and closed doors and I was going to say monogamous, but that's not the right metaphor. And then it's taken quite a while to have this become more participatory and more out into the world. And so this is not a quote unquote mistake that I would want to happen with this work. I mean, as quickly and seamlessly to integrate it. And I'm getting a bandwidth warning here, but I think that and I just want to address the developmental level aspect of this, and and tie it into something you said earlier, and the concept of Stefan saying that the math changes. And so I think that um, you can imagine us talking 300 years ago and talking about, oh, you need to be at a certain developmental level to use an abstract Turing machine, and yet we
Yeah.
don't anymore. And so I think that also is something that turns itself over,
Hmm.
and what
Yeah.
becomes post formal for us becomes conventional, and then there's that rolling thing. So
Yeah.
even though that's appropriate now as we look at this work right now, my intuition is to not get stuck there on the
Yeah.
developmental
No,
aspect.
absolutely. I think, and I don't think um, I don't think I've ever seen this anywhere, or I don't think I've ever talked with anybody who thinks this necessarily. But my sense of it is that, we're with these developmental aptitudes, we're taking snapshots, right? We're
Mhm.
taking a snapshot of what it looks like to be a human being now, and those kind of start to telescope, as we go on. So, and I don't quite just mean that, like, now when you're 30, you're expected to be, at whatever it is, Keegan's fourth order. You're expected to be a sort of rational,
Mhm.
independent, hermetically separate self. I mean that really, like, our I'm pointing really at, like, the dynamism of human becoming, um, and its own dynamic for overcoming itself and continually
Yeah.
overcoming itself, even given, a limited lifetime and limited bodies, and all of these things that we work with, that are quote unquote constraints.
Yeah.
It's a
No.
lot packed into that, though, too. I don't even know. I mean, that's a very different conversation. But yeah, that's my sense of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where the work is huge. I mean, that's a whole line of inquiry that is ongoing, that is well informed, and there are people who are doing really, really top research in there. So, um, yeah, I think you picked a really good topic to professionalize your life around. So.
I don't know. That's what I'm doing. Yeah, this is actually just a really long marketing pitch.
Well, I thought I'd throw that in for you. I think we probably coming to the end.
Yeah, yeah.
Because everything else I want to talk about are just like all these now the diamond has 5 million facets, and
Yeah.
um,
Well, there's a really interesting thing that I think, um, we've been talking about fullness a lot, and yet, um, and yet there's, and then fullness is sort of like that constantly reaching out to everything. Everything has 1,000 different spurts, and it's very easy to get caught up in all of that and dragged along with that. And yet, I think to really engage with this, um, it also takes an anchoring in emptiness, and that emptiness sees the emptiness of all those facets of the diamond, and it's able to see the diamond all at one time. So rather than being like, all these faces are coming up constantly, I want to talk about this face and this face and this face, there is a sense of, what is the thread? What is the thread of this moment? What is the most skillful thing that I can do as a human being at this moment in time, given this gigantic diamond that I can't possibly presence in its entirety right
right.
now? And I just wanted to presence that too, because so much of our conversation has been about that beautiful and wonderful fullness, and so much of my experience is about that too. And yet, as I'm talking with you, what I'm aware of is that awareness as space, and that's, as I say this in a side note somewhere, I think a footnote in my appendix, but that's a metaphor too. Awareness is not space, right? But there's this aspect of awareness that's both infinitely expansive and yet completely and absolutely here and present, and just for the sake of having said it, I want to make sure that that's presenced as well, because I think that that's equally as important as the fact that everything is here at once. It's like fireworks, but the fireworks need the night sky. Without the night sky, you can't see fireworks. So,
Yeah, and I think of it as cascade, but it's not like like it's just
yeah,
energy and enthusiasm, but the whole is not absent because you haven't
right.
articulated the
Yeah,
parts.
yeah,
The parts are sitting out. They're like the fireworks is good. The parts are out there being generated by the whole,
yeah,
right? So it's not like you're chasing something. The whole is the explosion
yeah.
of the enthusiastic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's
So
that urge too, is this is how the whole expresses itself in this moment, as this part, as this moment, or what have you.
yeah.
And um, I think I spent some time this summer in Switzerland with a group that used to be called the Global Cooperative Forum, that grew out of Adi Da's work, but they're coming at this from a slightly different direction. But there's a lot of resonance with the work that I feel like we're talking about today. And one of the things that I heard when I was there, I don't remember who said it, but it was like, you know, for a truly genuine world governance, right? For a truly genuinely global organization, you can't have representatives that whose mission is to just represent wherever they're coming from. If you're from the United States and you're in this, organization, to say you cannot be representing the United States, you have to be representing the whole. And I thought that was such a beautiful insight and such a difference from the way that we do, representative democracy nowadays. But you're not just, we are waking up together, and individually we are waking up to being these nodes of consciousness growing out of the universe, and constantly growing and constantly growing and constantly growing out of the universe, and yet we're not separate from all of that. We are that movement to we are that movement to emerge from the whole. Every moment we're doing that. And I think that for me has been, maybe the thing that has most changed my like day-to-day experience that I've experienced within these spaces. Like when you're, you know, I think it's in it's in the appendix that talks about the experience that my wife and I had. But when you are subjectivity, and the bounds between your subjectivity and somebody else's subjectivity, not your experience, right? Because
Right.
our experiences are different. but the bounds between your subjectivity and my subjectivity are not to be found. Go and look for them, and you're not going to find them anywhere. And you know, you, one, I, anybody, I think that's happening is, and in these groups, what's happening is we're waking up just as subjectivity,
Yeah.
which holds everything within itself and is everything at the same time. Um, yeah,
Yeah, I think that's true for not only subjectivity, but for physical. I mean, you start looking at where do you stop
yeah,
physically and where does something begin.
yeah,
And so there's extension in space in all those levels, subjective, intersubjective, physical, but then there's also the time.
yeah,
There's no, you can't find the origin, you know? And so when you truly, I mean, I wrote this in my paper, when you truly start to participate, you get in this very Whiteheadian, you get extended in space and time through
yeah,
all those levels,
yeah,
and and that, you know, talk about relational dynamics magnifying. I mean, this is creativity itself, or yeah. And that's, I think, for me, where the trust comes from. It's like there's no doubt that we're coming from the same hole. I, I, and it's kind of like if we just didn't obstruct it, it would be okay. You know, I know that's a simplification, but that is the axiom, right, of this work. It's that no matter how many diversions, diverticulations, pluralism, even if we have incommensurable beliefs, none of that can change this fundamental axiom of this completely shared history and completely seamless extension.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it's worth the price of admission.
Yeah, it's a fantastic ride, kids. Uh, yeah, I just, you know, it's funny because even that word trust, like trust has trust has sort of in it this assumption of this other agent, you know, like this powerful agent, this other agent that can do something to me that I don't want to have happen, you know, and um, obviously as a body mind, that's true in a way. Like as a body mind, I trust or don't trust the external world, and yet that it's not even like there's no. I'm riffing off of your.
Yeah, yeah,
There's no doubt that we're coming out of the same hole. But it's also too. It's like it's too obvious to mention that sense of trust is not even. It's not implicit. It's not like hidden by any means.
yeah,
But it's so out there as to not even need mentioning. It's not a golden, or what do we say? It's not a pink elephant. You know, it's not a 500-pound gorilla. It's a golden elephant.
yeah,
It's there. It's the medium through which we're interacting. Is that trust? Is
yeah,
that or that not lack of trust, but that disillusion of the need for trust, the disillusion of there being this you know important difference between trust and between doubt.
yeah. And then we have this extraordinary phenomenon, right? Because if we were really coming only from that place of trust, we wouldn't have a word for it, right? Because we would be that. And you can't have a word for what you be.
Yeah,
But we also have what the Buddhists call is a path, right? So we're born in the middle. We're
yeah,
born from the trust, but we are not that until then in our day and age we get post-formal and we start to deconstruct why we're not trust to find who we really are. And this is also, right, so if we want to be inclusive, this is the other side, I think, of what you're trying to say about trust. You know, that there's that, and
yeah,
there's the dynamic. Trust is not just something, is not just emptiness. it's that and the
Yeah.
dynamism of making itself known.
Yeah. Mhm.
And
Sure.
yeah,
Yeah. There's something very important about finding that, and I think the way that I'm, coding or cognizing what you're saying is that and which I completely agree with you. I don't
yeah,
mean
yeah,
to suggest that it's just that action, but that's sort of one end of this. And spectrum's not exactly technically right, I think, but just for the idea, it works fine. But there's the
yeah,
spectrum of trusting that, in the act of being with one another consciously and investigating and inquiring and intentionally. Um, trust becomes greater and greater and greater. You have greater and greater and greater opportunities to be trust and to share trust and to give trust. And then, as that comes out and iterates and iterates and iterates, then at a certain point, oh, it's not trust anymore. It's just me. It's just being. I don't think that's a state experience for sure.
no, I know, I hear you.
But yeah, I mean that's my experience and the way that I understand it at the least.
Yeah, I don't think that we are articulating different perspectives. We're just keep nuancing it. And yeah, no, I hear you. That's why I said it's worth the price of admission, because you're born into this conditioned experience and you're small and helpless, and then you have to.
Well, and you need to. I mean, one of the beautiful. I have a daughter now, and as you mentioned earlier, and she's 6. She's not quite 6 weeks old, and no matter how good of a job my wife and I do in raising her, she's going to be conditioned. That's natural. It's normal, and it's a good thing.
Yeah,
And that ties into what you were saying before. Like we tend to think of our conditions or our pain or our vulnerabilities or our issues as being the thing that's getting us in the way from this other thing that we want.
yeah,
And that I think, in the terms that that's an egoic thing. That's a rational thing.
right.
That's a linear time thing. That's a projection of that's a projection of everything good out into the future, and that's a good thing. There's no problem with that. That's the fuel that we use to develop. It's the fuel that we use to grow, and it can be a bad thing. I mean, if I don't do this, but if I went downstairs and eat my daughter senseless or something terrible like that, right? I would never do that, but if I did, she might not have the capabilities to get over that ever, right?
Right,
And
right,
and
right,
that's,
right,
that's
right.
a totally different question. But in the normal course of your development, as you grow up as a person, you're going to you're going to be a person in a way that is going to obstruct half of the universe. And then the second half of the story is, how do you recognize that you did that and then undo that, but in a way that isn't, not going backwards, but in a way that's like, oh, I'm now home, but it's also the first time that I've been here. I'm home, but I'm different. I'm
Yeah.
home, but I have these capacities that I didn't have when I was not doing this or when I was born.
And I look at it as a generative thing. There is, I call it the Plato theory of cosmology. So it's the way that for me, the reason why complexity grows with uniqueness and not the other way around is because of layers of generative conditioning. So I think of, like, what the Play-Doh fun factory is. Like, you put the Play-Doh in the thing and you squish it down.
Plato, Plato, not Plato.
No, Play-Doh. You know that thing? You put the Play-Doh in and you squish it down, it comes out the hole, right?
Yeah,
So if I put
yeah,
a star there, it
yeah,
comes out as a star. That's a condition. But if I put a star and a
right.
something else, it'll come out with two conditions. And if I keep adding conditions, then the thing grows with complexity and uniqueness at the same
Yeah,
time, right?
yeah, totally,
So,
totally, totally. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and then so what you're saying is that, and I think it's sort of similar. I think, or I won't go in. Yeah, I mean,
It's a simple model. Don't try.
no, no, but it's no, it's a good one though. Again, the recognition that again, it goes back to that, like there isn't nothing that could possibly be coming up right now could um, nothing that could possibly be coming up right now could negatively impact what is happening unless it's reacted to, right? Like so again, your conditioning, everything that you're bringing is crucially important. That's why we need everybody in this. That's why this is something that we need everybody to be doing in a very real way. Everybody has got to be getting together and talking with each other in this sort of way, because we need everybody's unique conditioning, because that unique conditioning brings something to the table that nobody else possibly can. There's something that's really, it's kind of trite. We say it, we've said it before a million times. That's why, though. That's like the dynamic behind it, and it's real. It's something that's actually and very much true. And if you're in a relationship with somebody, I think I have this in the thesis. Is one of the things that I really love that has come out of this work for me. If I need you to be different for me to be myself, then I'm lying to myself, or
Yeah.
I'm lying to you, right? I'm not actually, but again, if I'm doing that, that's good information.
Yeah.
That's something that I was like, wow, wait a minute, stop for a second and look at that. Why is it that I think that? Why is it that I feel that
Right.
way? If I'm able to metabolize that, I'm probably going to come out better. I'm going to come out different than I thought I was.
Exactly.
Going to be scary, but I'm going to come out in a way that I'm going to like, essentially. And
Well,
other people more too, probably.
your thesis gave me one really significant insight, and it was kind of a
Compliment, I guess, right? Yeah, that's a
yeah, and it
good.
was no, it's definitely a compliment.
In other contexts, that could be probably a put down. I think that is a great compliment. If I gave you a great insight, that's awesome. That's good news.
No, let me tell you what it is, because I just remembered it because of what you were saying, and it was the context. Everything is the context and the setting, and I knew it was you. Anyways, so you start off by quoting Bhaskar, or quoting what he says often about trying to build the eudaimonistic society where the
Yeah,
conditions for the flourishing of the one, right?
yeah,
And so you weren't making the point, you were kind of starting off with his point. And then it was like, boom. I'm like, we're not building that. That's
yeah,
exactly how it works.
yeah. That's how it
Like
is. Yeah,
that's the why. You know?
yeah.
And you know how like you said, insights are like it comes with a state experience. So for a viewing audience, it might seem very trivial, but it just like, whoa.
And then the why behind that. So, and this is sort of the third shadow topic, right? So we have we space, then we have like what happens as humans start to develop into a place where they're no longer sourcing themselves from like personality motivations, and they get together and practice that. And then the third part is, why would we do that in the first place? Why isn't that just the way that we do things?
Yeah.
And it's because, when we what we take as real comes out of these conditionings that we have, and it's very hard to do that nowadays. And I don't know if this will ever not be the case, but it's very hard to do that without breaking the world up into these categories and into opposites. And one of the ones that we do so regularly that we don't notice it is autonomy and community, or I and we, or agency and community, or whatever it is. I mean, we have a million different words for basically the same thing. And what you come into contact with while you're doing this is that those were. It's not that they were never separate. It's that, yes, there's this kind of autonomy and there's this kind of community. And yeah, in a way, this way of being preference is autonomy and this way of being preference is community. But as you develop, you're developing into deeper expressions of autonomy and community. No matter where you are, the more autonomous that you are,
Right.
the more available you are to enter into community. And so that fundamental boundary line there isn't something that is describing territories that are separate, forever. They're not even really describing things that are necessarily, these two polar dynamics that are always playing with each other. That line is the activity of creating my agency within community, and it's not in conflict. And in fact,
Right.
and that's what's in that Bhaskar quote. In fact, if I am creating the conditions for my own best, greatest, whatever self-development, I am necessarily creating the conditions for everybody else's, and vice versa. And
Right.
if I'm doing one of those things, I'm also not doing the other one, because that's the way it works. Those things
That's
are not
the way
separate. each
That's
other.
the way it
I think
works.
it works.
Yeah,
And
and we could segue now into, which is not really part of this conversation, but how our language, our dualistic and dialectical, our language doesn't help us, although you just did a really beautiful job. But
yeah, I disagree with you actually. I think I know. I mean, I know the point that you're going at, and I think I don't. It's in language, right? It's not like a. It's not a function of language or some essential thing about language. I think it's the way that we use language. I think it's the way that we're cultured to use language. But
oh
it's
no, I
to
agree with you.
say that is a. Yeah, you used the word poetry before. It's possible to do that in a way that is a. You're poetically
Right.
bringing the world, and it's not in the language, but it's in the communication. It's in the transmission. What am I giving to you as I'm using language? Where is the language coming from? So so yeah, and I'm sure you're saying the same point too. I just, it makes it funner if I
Yeah,
just.
yeah, yeah. I think that we don't have to belabor the point, but the way we normally use language, and we get distracted by the sense that these boundaries are rigid, and our language can do that, or we can use you know what I'm saying? There's an iterative aspect to that, but um, yeah, I think that I mean I love the way you talked about you just what you just said was much more mature than the other ways people have talked about the tension or the dialectic between agency and communion in we space. What you just said was much more, in my opinion, mature way of talking about that. It's not clear to me that people aren't saying or experiencing the same thing. It's just that your articulation of it, I think, for me anyways, captured more of the systemic and generative nature of that than the appositional or tensional
Yeah,
nature of that.
yeah, and I
Because these
think
things are all generative.
right,
Yeah,
absolutely, and I think that has to do. You said it's not exact. It's not so much maybe in the experience, but you're still interpreting your experience through whatever structure it is that you're speaking
yeah,
through, like whatever your filtering is, you're still going to be speaking it that way. And I think part of it is in continually being drawn back into this space where that was that's being shown as not just being the way that things are, right? and
right.
and, and actually, you know what, I'm going to take a right turn here because that has something to do with the question for service too, which is um, um, you know I took a right turn into a brick wall. Oh my God. I just had this totally fully formed like thought bubble, right? With like all of these different things going off of it, and I dropped it and I don't know where I put it. Um, what were we talking about? Bashkar. Uh,
Okay,
so
I said that. Okay, so I said these things are always generative. They're not necessarily. It's a very subtle thing. So when we talk about it as being intentional space, that's different than when we truly see that they're generative. And
right.
then that's the last thing I said.
Well, and then we're always, and that's one of the things I think that every like, I won't say it in a developmental way, but every realization that you have, which carries with it this notion that it's always been there too, right? It's something new, and it's also always been there. At least that's the experience of it. Um, uh, that maybe I should. My baby brain is catching up with me. That's so funny. I just did this. Fast
uh,
talk, generative. That's there it is. So so yeah. I mean, what reality just does that, right? Reality is generative in a way in which it couldn't not be, and it couldn't ever not have been. But in coming into contact with that, like in actually realizing that in my experience as an agent, as a being doing, right? I have the ability to bring that about in a way that I may not have, 10, 20 years ago, right?
yeah.
And humanity at this point has the ability to at least start to experiment with this in a way that may not have been possible 20, 30, 50 years ago, centuries ago, whatever you want to say. But reality was still generative then. It was still
Yes.
happening, and it was still happening in a way in which it wasn't like you're walking along train tracks, but in a way in which, I love this phrase. This is a a phrase from again, um, one of my favorite poems, whose name I can't remember. He's an early 20th century poet from America. He lived in Hartford. He was an insurance agent.
Yes. Uh, um,
Wallace Stevens.
Wallace
Wallace Stevens.
Stevens.
Wallace Stevens has this phrase which is like I'm singing the world into existence. It's not
Yeah.
it's a paraphrase, but I'm singing the world into existence, and that's
Yeah.
always been the way that it has been, even though we haven't realized it. But we're constantly creating the world that we're then walking in, and even to say then is not really accurate because it's not linear in that sense. But I'm
Right.
I'm
Right.
bringing about a world as my activity of being in the world, um, and that's where the mathematics change. That's where we go from be doing algebra to doing calculus.
Yeah.
In a way of saying it, calculus.
Yeah.
What are you looking at when you're looking off to the side?
Oh, just out the window at the trees being
Yeah,
trees. Um, there's just kind of nothing in my mind right now, so I was just being with that.
letting it come. Yeah. Hmm. I'm wondering where, we sort of set out with this intention to have, um, I think maybe it speaks to just start four sentences without finishing any of them. Um, we sort of started this call with the intention to give people who are listening a sort of taste of our own process of, you know, iterating with each other and not just about something that we're looking about, but actually, really engaging with another being. What is it like to do that? And uh, um, so, I'm wondering, and I think one of the interesting things, so my response to that question of like, how have we done in that? So I have like sort of there are 2 points that come up for me. One is that I think somebody watching this probably, um, unless they're really tuned in with us, or I won't say it that way, but it could very easily look like you and I are just having a normal conversation between two people who happen to know each other a little bit and are sort of poking at each other in an interpersonal way slightly. And yet, for me, I'm very aware of interacting with you in this way. But the focus of our topic has still been we space practices and not what's going on between the two of us, right? So that makes it so there's a lot of interesting things going on here. So I feel very much in this relational space with you, but we're not putting attention on that relational space as it exists between the two of us, which makes it a little bit different. And yet that has been a very, it's been a strong experience for me as I'm here with you. I'm very conscious of being with you right now, and have been the whole time that we've been um, talking. And yet I think from the outside that probably um, it's easy for it not to look that way. And I think that speaks to, these are participatory spaces. You really need to be, and of course I could totally be projecting that on people,
Yeah,
so I
yeah.
have no idea what you're thinking if you're watching this, because I'm not you right now doing that. But um, as I feel into that, it brings up that sense that you have to engage with it. You can also study it, but if you're
Right.
studying it, you better engage with it, right? You better actually be doing it in
Yeah.
your relationships and moment to moment.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, the word that came up for me is I felt and feel
Yeah,
accompanied,
yeah,
like through all of that, and um and really it's kind of like um the way we set off and having that feeling of fullness, and then it's just like watching it show
Yeah.
up through this, and 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 I think that's an important aspect of the work, because we practice the work itself as an object to create capacity, but then as it becomes tacit knowledge, it you play in that capacity.
Yeah.
That's how I feel with you, and like we started off by saying, the first time we met each other, this kind of natural synergy. Um, you make it easy,
Oh.
So, um, but yeah, not to get hung up on what it looks like.
I want I want to stop you for a second and actually let's because I that's I was very affected by that when you just said that. That was really I felt very touched by that. You just that totally lit me up. I appreciate that that compliment
Yeah,
or that
because
observation.
what happened was, when I was talking about that, I went back to that first. I could see us on the porch there, and I could feel that's you, and that I could feel you, and I could feel what that was like, yeah. So, and then that's what came out of my mouth. You make it easy, because that was what I was. Yeah, I went there, and you seemed, you were right there, and like, so. So thank you. This has been great.
Yeah, this is one of the fun ones, huh?
We could
Uh,
have gone on for who knows when it actually, if we were together, like, you never know when it,
no,
yeah.
it's a long game. It's a long game. Um, yeah, thank you very much. I mean,
Yeah,
thank you for. I mean, I just feel I actually have felt very supported in putting my thesis out there because you've sort of been there with it, like literally every step of the way. Like anytime you almost do anything, you're almost invariably the first person that notices and that reads it and that looks at it and starts to. And I think I definitely I have an audience in writing my paper, and that audience is composed of a lot of different people, of course, but you were clearly one of the people that was sitting there as I was writing the paper and sort of influencing me as I'm
yeah,
going along with it. So I'm really, I'm both, yeah, no, I'm just grateful actually and
yeah.
happy and yeah,
All right. Well, you
and I
have
hope
a great
uh,
evening. I guess it's late there, but
uh, I got to start cooking dinner for my family actually.
awesome.
Uh, got to start eating dinner with my family. Actually, is what I should be doing. But yeah, thank you, and I hope that I hope that this is helpful. That it isn't. That it gives people an idea of what
Yeah,
is going on and what some of the exciting and emerging things that are happening. And yeah,
yeah. Great
I hope
work.
it's the symposium as well. I hope that it helps. Get the word out about the symposium, which
Yeah.
is yeah,
We'll talk again. If not before, certainly we'll touch base on what the
for
symposium
sure.
was like.
Yes, for sure, totally.
Love to your
Oh,
family.
yeah,
Great.
thank you. Bye bye.